Good afternoon. Welcome back, and welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time. My name is Ava Perrine, and I'm a member of the faculty here at Delaware State. I teach in the Department of Mass Communications. Our panelists, our esteemed panelists, are Lynn C. French and W. Paul Coates. For those of you who do not have a program, I will read their bios. Lynn C. French was a member of the Black Panther Party from 1969 until 1973, working in Chicago as well as Oakland and Berkeley, California. In the party, she worked in a variety of areas, including newspaper circulation, labor, finance, breakfast programs, food and clothing giveaways. French joined the D.C. Department of Housing and Community Development in 1987 as Homestead Program Administrator. She led the team that drafted Homeless No More, a strategy for ending homelessness in Washington, D.C. by 2014. Mr. W. Paul Coates is the founder and director of Black Classic Press, which specializes in republishing obscure and significant works by and about people of African descent. A leader in the field of small publishers, Coates founded BCP Digital Printing in 1995 to produce books and documents using digital print technology. A former member and Maryland State Coordinator of the Black Panther Party, he was instrumental in the establishment of the Black Panther Party archives at Howard University. His experience with the purchase, sale, collection, and publishing of books by and about Blacks is a love affair that has continued for more than 3 decades. Please welcome our panelists. We have a relatively loose format, and as it has been explained to me, each of the panelists, our guests, will have about 25 minutes or so to present, to talk about what they do and so forth, their perspectives, and then toward the end, we will certainly take Q&A, question and answers. Okay.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be introduced by someone from Bronzeville, which is where we had an office of the Black Panther Party in Chicago at 43rd and Indiana. So that's a point of personal privilege there. How many of you were here last night and saw the movie? So you all got to hear Fred Hampton speak. Okay. I was a member of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and our primary headquarters was started first on the west side of Chicago, then the south side of Chicago, and then we ultimately were over branches and chapters in the Midwest. But I want to talk a little bit about how Chicago was when we got started. Chicago is, Chicago, New York, and LA are in that category of cities that are mega cities, larger than any other cities in the country. And most of the Black people at the time that I moved to Chicago in 1967 to go to school. And most of the African Americans there had come to Chicago through the Great Migration, and most of them were from Mississippi or some from Louisiana and other places, the Mississippi Delta area. People had just come north on the Illinois Central Railroad and come to Chicago. The interesting thing to note is that in addition to African Americans, people coming, I know I don't have to tell you what the Great Migration was and how people were fleeing some pretty horrible conditions in Mississippi, where people did not have full rights of citizenship, were sharecroppers. Even though slavery had ended, people were treated not much better than slaves, and so they were fleeing horrible situations. But also, white people migrated to Chicago from down south too. So what they were greeted with was a police force that was comprised of officers, some of whom weren't so dissimilar from the KKK in Mississippi. And their attitude about the African American community was they were going to keep people straight, keep things in order. Chicago has a pretty sophisticated political machine, it always has. And back in the earlier part of the 20th century, when African Americans were first starting to try to get into that system, because that's how communities got services. If you were represented on the city council by an alderman was a pretty powerful person who could ensure that his or her community got the basic services from the city that they deserved. Trash picked up, good schools, decent places to live. So an early drive was to be included in that government. And one of the first African Americans to get to that point, to be able to seriously consider being elected an alderman on the west side of Chicago, was murdered in broad daylight by 4 police officers, who later were assigned to investigate the shooting. So you can imagine what didn't happen. I'm saying all this to say that there's a pretty bloody history, a pretty horrible history in Chicago, relationship between the Chicago police and the African American community. Later in the earlier 60s, just before I moved there, another person who was positioning himself to become a political force was murdered. So when I arrived there in 1967, it was in the midst of the Chicago Freedom Movement. Dr. King had come to Chicago. He'd said, well, you know, we conquered segregation in the South. Let's go to Chicago. Let's start to address issues in urban areas. And he essentially was run out of Chicago. He just couldn't get traction. Not to say that people didn't, the African American community welcomed him, but he got no respect and couldn't get any traction and ended up retreating pretty quickly. So there were many of us. There was a very rich life of black. We didn't call ourselves African Americans then, so that's why I keep saying black. Black organizations. One I joined at that period was called the Black Women's Committee for the Protection and Care of Our Children, that was started by Diane Nash. There were a lot of small organizations, and Black power was on everybody's lips, and we were all looking at how can we exercise some power, how can we really create some change in the community. And meanwhile, police repression was just getting worse and worse and worse. The police were riding around with shotguns mounted in their cars. Nobody felt protected by them. And we looked in the news, and we saw all of a sudden in the news about these black guys going into the state legislature in California, challenging them about guns. And we're like, wait a minute. Because here were some people who were taking control, saying, we want to control our own destiny. And that's what we were searching for. We wanted to transition from the position of asking for permission and looking at how can we control our destinies and create a community that we want to live in and that we want to raise our children in. And so we saw these guys at the state legislature. We saw Bobby Seale, this person we had never heard of before, speaking there. And then we all used to read Ramparts magazine. Does anybody here know what Ramparts magazine used to be? Ramparts was like one of the most progressive magazines out there. And they hired this guy who had been not long out of prison named Eldridge Cleaver to be a writer. And we read on the pages of Ramparts magazine about the same organization, Black Panther Party. So we're like, that's what we want to be. So everyone's just, that was the buzz. Everybody's talking about it. How do you connect to it? And there were several different groups of people in Chicago who were trying to connect to them, and they were sort of saying, oh, we don't want anybody in Chicago, and sort of ignoring us. But still, we were like, whatever's happening here, we want to be part of it. Things got a little, got worse after Dr. King was assassinated, and the South Side and the West Side burned. All the business corridors in the black community, and we were determined to do something. I was a student at Roosevelt University, which is an urban college in Chicago, downtown in the Loop, and we had organized one of the first black student organizations. Now there's a black student organization everywhere, but in those days there weren't. And after, Dr. King had just been killed, we said we wanted to have an event. We wanted to call people together across the city to come and have some dialogue about what was going on and look at what we should be doing. And we said, we need a speaker. Of course, we didn't have any money, but we're like, we need a speaker. And so one of our classmates named Bill Hampton said, well, I have this brother who's a pretty good speaker, and he would probably come. He's a youth leader in the NAACP. His name is Fred. So we invited Fred Hampton to come speak. And that's the first that we met. Fred Hampton and Bobby Rush came with him, and they were in the stage. Bobby Rush and Bob Brown organized the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and Fred had been their first recruit. And they were recruiting in the colleges, junior colleges, in high schools in the city. So they came, and that's how I connected with the Black Panther Party formally and joined the party towards the end of 1968. 1968 was a pretty rich year in Chicago. It was the year of the Democratic Convention. We heard Bobby Seale speak in Grant Park because there was the Democratic Party was going through, I'm sure you've already learned in your history classes, how the Democratic Party was going through a switch. Traditionally in the past, the African Americans had been Republicans because that was the party of Lincoln, and the Democratic Party was the party of racists in the South. So most black people in the past had been Republicans, but they were going through a switch now. And in 1964, the SNCC had gone, people from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party at the end of the Mississippi Freedom Summer had gone to Atlantic City to the Democratic Convention to confront them about it being not only a lily white organization, but to say, how can you have a delegation that represents the state of Mississippi and there's not one black person on it when we're the majority in the state? So there was a whole confrontation, showdown. They didn't get seated, but the Democratic Party adopted some rules at that point about diversity. So 1968 was the first convention after that, and it was in Chicago. And people were looking to see, well, are we going to have a presence at the convention? And once more, there was more presence than there had been in '64. But by this time, you had people demonstrating against the war in Vietnam. You had people protesting Dr. King's. Dr. King had been assassinated. People were saying we want equal rights, and there was still a sense that there was not access. So there were massive demonstrations in the downtown area in Chicago, which is known as the Loop, and there were rallies, and Bobby Seale came in and gave a speech at Grant Park, at Lincoln Park, and from that, I guess there was an indictment of 8 people who had been speakers claiming that they came in to incite violence, when in fact what had happened was that Mayor Daley had sent the police out to get rid of all of the demonstrators, and they'd sort of run amok with people and locked them up to shut down the demonstrations. So that was our introduction to the Black Panther Party, and to Bobby Seale was our first direct contact. The Illinois chapter was led by Fred Hampton, who was deputy chairman of the Black Panther Party, and Bobby Rush, who was Deputy Minister of Defense. And we grew pretty rapidly, sort of in a reflection of what was happening with the party nationally, because what drew us there was we were young people who were at an age where we knew we wanted to be free. We knew that we wanted to be able to determine our own destiny. And we knew that we didn't like the conditions in the housing conditions in our community. We knew that the schools were pretty lousy, and we wanted to talk about how we could take control and change things, because we realized that just asking for change was not going to bring it about. We quickly developed programs, the same programs that were developed nationally in the party. Our first big program was the Breakfast for School Children program. At that point, there was no such thing as free breakfast in public schools or free lunch the way that there is now. That's why we're called the Vanguard. We led the country into that policy. We were concerned about children going to school hungry and malnourished, so we started going around asking for donations from grocers and different people to chip in money so that we could serve breakfast for school children. And we were going to have our first one open that winter on the west side at the Better Boys Foundation. The night before it was scheduled to open, the police broke into the Better Boys Foundation and smashed up all the food, urinated on it. It was just obnoxious. It was obscene. And so we called a press conference and invited people to come in and see what they had done to this food. That all that we had done was gotten this food. As Chairman Bobby said, J. Edgar Hoover had said, what did you say that he said? The breakfast program was a threat to national security. That's how they treated us. And so by having that press conference, all of a sudden donations came pouring in from all over the city, and we were able to open up breakfast programs in a variety of neighborhoods in the south side and the west side of Chicago. And one of the leading newspapers decided to run a series on hunger in Chicago, giving the statistics about the effect of malnutrition and hunger on children, and sort of underscoring our point that children needed to have a full stomach to be successful in school. And so that illustrates, we always called ourselves the Vanguard. You might remember that the name of the movie last night was Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution. What Vanguard meant was we were leading the way. We were coming up with ideas, not because we wanted to kill somebody or be mean or anything, because we wanted to have positive change and we wanted to lead the way. So as a result of our having free breakfast programs all over the country, before you knew it, that became national policy. The federal government gives money to school systems across the country to feed school children. We felt that health care was a real problem in the community. In Chicago, we started the first free health clinic. We went to doctors who had been doctors for the civil rights movement in the South, the Medical Committee for Human Rights, and they agreed to staff our clinic, and we opened a clinic on the west side of Chicago to offer free health care. And we had a sickle cell anemia drive because that was an issue for the Black community. And now, within a few years, it became the national trend to have clinics in communities all over the country because it was recognized that healthcare, not to say that healthcare was perfect, but that's how the whole the movement for clinics in communities, community clinics came about, was after we led the way with our free healthcare in the Black Panther Party. In Chicago, we had, I don't know if any of you watch the Academy Awards, but there's always an Irving Thalberg Award given at the Academy Awards for somebody who has had a good career in film. Well, Irving Thalberg's son bought for us a Greyhound bus, and we superimposed a Black Panther where the Greyhound usually was, and we used that bus to take people to visit their relatives who were in prison, or if we had an activity where we needed to transport people, we used our Panther bus. We had an awful lot of programs, and we were getting an awful lot of support. I learned in later years that there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the way we had organized ourselves and the way that Richard Daley, who was the mega mayor of Boston, of Chicago for like 40 years, had grown out of a group in the Irish community on the south side, and he sort of built his empire on services to people. And so he always saw a threat in us, and they were always following us, arresting us, doing whatever. Fred Hampton was one of the most dynamic speakers that I have ever heard speak. He was one of the most, he was just a very powerful leader. And when people would hear him talk, he could just break down issues, and you heard him a little bit in that movie. They showed him at several rallies, and just was a very, very powerful speaker, and he just kept getting arrested right and left over just phony, trumped up things. The craziest thing was that at one point they arrested him because they claimed he had gone to a playground and held down the good humor man and told all the children on the playground to come get free ice cream. It was so ridiculous. We're like, get out of here, you know, that's just crazy. So he goes to court, and the lawyers think they have this whole thing set up to be thrown out of court. And you know, they have a plea bargain, and the judge says to him, I hear you say you're a revolutionary. Are you a revolutionary? And Fred said, yes, I'm a revolutionary. So the judge gave him a huge sentence because of that. And they shipped him to Statesville Penitentiary in Illinois, which is a major penitentiary. And he started organizing there, and they saw danger in that. So they shipped him to the Menard prison in southern Illinois. That's a prison for the criminally insane, to try to bury him away from the rest of the people in prison. Because we didn't believe, one of the points of our 10-point program was that black people in prison had not been given a fair trial. They weren't given a jury of their peers, and we didn't trust the criminal justice system, and we believed that many people were there on trumped up charges, just as Fred was. So ultimately, Fred got out of jail on an appeal bond, and he just had a few months out. And during that period, he just kept things going. You saw in that film a speech where he's talking about the beat goes on, and when he said white power to white people, yellow power to yellow people, that was at that big rally when he got out. And by this time, J. Edgar Hoover had sent a message to Chicago police saying Fred needed to be killed. He was given notice around Thanksgiving time that his appeal had been denied. He was given a date that he was to turn himself in. And they clearly didn't want him back in prison. It wasn't even like he was going to be on the streets and some kind of threat to them. They wanted him killed. They wanted him gone. A message was sent for him to be gone. And so the message came through the state's attorney. That's what that's the title in Chicago for the lead prosecutor, Edward V. Hanrahan. And he went to the Chicago police, and they rehearsed how they were going to do this, that they were going to go to Fred's apartment and go in and do this and do that. And the Chicago police, as repressive and fascist as they were, refused to partake of that exercise. They said, this is murder. This isn't serving a warrant or something. Hanrahan had a phony claim that Fred's apartment was an arsenal for illegal weapons. And yes, there were guns in Fred's apartment, and yes, we were armed in the Black Panther Party, but every gun that was in Fred Hampton's apartment had been purchased legally. And to purchase a gun legally, you had to have a license, so it wasn't even like they could say, oops, we thought they were illegal. They knew they were legal. They knew what we had purchased. So that was a pretense to go in there. The Chicago police said, we're not doing this. So Edward Hanrahan handpicked a raiding party that was made up of officers from various police departments, some from the Illinois Bureau of Investigation, some were police officers from the Chicago Police Department who were known to be really just the kind of police officers who would beat people when they arrested them. They were from a variety of places, and they waited. First, they had someone who they had been paying all along to be an informant in the chapter named William O'Neill. You saw him in the film. William O'Neill went to serve some Kool-Aid to Fred and put Seconal in it, enough to knock him out. So he fell asleep. Fred had not been staying at his apartment because he knew things were at the end. He was close to where he was supposed to turn himself in. There was a lot of turmoil. So he had been staying at different apartments at different nights, but because he was drugged, he stayed there that night. And very early in the morning, when it was late enough for anyone who might be out on the streets partying or anything would be home, but too early for people who catch the early bus to go to work, like let's say maybe around 5 in the morning, they come to his block and they blocked off either end of the street with street cleaning equipment so that no one would pass through. They had sharpshooters on the roofs of all the buildings in the block, and they divided themselves into two groups. One went in through the front door and one went in through the rear. I think it was Dr. Jones who talked about how the ones who went in the front door, this guy Gloves was the lead person. He was a black police officer who was usually stationed on the south side, who was known for beating. He wore gloves when he beat up people. He went and knocked on the door, and Mark Clark answered the door. He, of course, was in a deep sleep, but he went to the door. He was holding a shotgun, but he was, you know, drowsy, and he says, "Who's there?" And they said, "Tommy." And he said, "Tommy who?" And they said, "Tommy gun." And they shot him through the door, through the heart. He died immediately. And his gun went off reflexively into the ceiling, but at that point, the point at which they had shot him through the door was the signal for everybody to come in. So they came piling in through the front door and the rear door. Fred's bedroom was at the rear. They had a diagram of his apartment, and they knew who was in which bed and who was there. And so the people in the back went and immediately focused on Fred, who was asleep in the bed with his pregnant fiancée. And of course, he was drugged so deeply that he wasn't physically capable of getting up or doing anything other than just lying there. And the ones in the front came in Vietnam style, where they were systematically spraying the apartment with semi-automatic weapons. Semi-automatic weapons were not even legal. Those weapons were not even legal in international warfare, according to the Geneva Treaty, but they came in and sprayed the whole apartment and started at the floor spraying up so that people who were in the bed were shot. Most of the people in the apartment were shot, some pretty badly. The only people who were killed were Mark Clark and Fred Hampton, but others were injured pretty badly. And at one point, they went in there to see if Fred was dead. They saw Deborah, and you heard her say herself in that movie last night that they came in and saw that. They said, "What do you know? We have a pregnant broad here." And they pulled her out, and they dragged her out by her hair, actually. And then they had Fred on the floor there and stood over him and blew his brains out and said, "He's good and dead now." And I don't know if you remember, but it's seared in my memory, the picture of them carrying him out of the apartment. There are 4 officers, and they have him on thing, and you can see his feet from underneath the blanket, and they're all smiling victoriously when they carry him out. Now, I'm told, in fact, I saw an article in the New York Times maybe 10 years ago, where they were talking about a meeting of the Chicago police officers. They have this annual, I don't know if it's their union or whatever, and that they had posters on the wall, and they had that picture of them carrying Fred out as a poster. It's sort of like a trophy or something, where they see that as a past victory. So I tell you all of these details because I want you to know about Fred Hampton, and I want you to know that he was brutally murdered. They knew that they were getting ready to put him back in prison. They knew that there were no illegal weapons in the apartment. They murdered him because he was a very powerful speaker, a brilliant man, a very effective organizer, and they wanted him dead because J. Edgar Hoover had said he was a threat to American security, and it was nothing but pure murder. It was a lynching Northern style. It was no different from the old days in Mississippi when they would go and get someone and string them up on a tree. They just murdered him in his sleep. And a mistake that they made was that they didn't seal the apartment up. And so we were able to photo document everything in there immediately afterwards. There was a film person, Mike Gray, who was interviewed in that film, who was already making a movie about Fred Hampton. And the lawyers called him in and he photo documented all of the evidence to help build the case. And the state's attorney had a live press conference the next morning claiming that there had been this horrible shootout with the Black Panther Party the night before, and they could hear Fred Hampton's voice telling people, shoot it out, get them. I mean, he just lied. He just made it up out of whole cloth. And because we had this documentation, we paid for our own ballistics expert to come in. They came in they line up bullet holes with straw. They have these long straws that they put through the holes so that they can see the trajectory of the bullets. And they could show conclusively that nobody in the party could have possibly fired any of those shots. And we got our own autopsy, which proved that Fred had been so heavily medicated that he would have been physically incapable of raising himself up out of the bed or saying shoot it out or even knowing what was going on. He was out cold. And so it was nothing but a brutal murder. And they did not seal the apartment, so for the next couple weeks we gave tours to people, anybody who wanted to come see the apartment. We left the straws lined up and all of that. And people came from all walks of life all over Chicago to see it. People who, by looking at them, we never would have imagined that they would have even been interested in supporting the Black Panther Party, but because it was so outrageous, people came to see, and people knew this was murder. They saw it firsthand. And there was a grand jury investigation. Nobody went to jail for it. There was the survivors recovered a lot of money. It took them like 15 years to recover money over it. But what did happen was there was already time for a city election, and Edward Hanrahan was supposed to be on the slate with Richard Daley to be reelected as state's attorney. And because of what happened, a blue ribbon grand jury was impaneled and he was indicted for this. So he couldn't be on the ballot, but in the primary he got enough votes to get on the ballot. And so what we did was we had what we called a campaign of conscience, and we took petitions out all over the city, and we would just stand out in the street and get people from all parts of the city to sign and say, basically, I remember that Fred Hampton was murdered, and I hereby pledge that I will never vote for Edward Hanrahan to have any office. And so when election night came, he was expecting to be victorious, and he was voted out of office. And it was essentially the end of his career. It didn't bring Fred back. It brought us some satisfaction that he wasn't reelected, and he died sometime maybe about 10 years ago. I clipped his obituary from all of the leading papers in the country, and every obituary, every news obituary about Edward V. Hanrahan basically labeled him as the person who murdered Fred Hampton, and talked about how he never had a career after that. Nobody nobody would associate with him, but he was labeled as the person who murdered Fred Hampton. So this is something that all of us have carried with us. That was in '69, and the party lasted in Chicago until 1974. I like to say that once a Panther, always a Panther, and although the Black Panther Party no longer exists, each of us carries that in our heart, and each of us carries that with what we choose to do in life. No matter what kind of work we've done, we all retain that commitment to the same principles that we had when we were in the Black Panther Party. And you can imagine how troubling it is to me now I read the Chicago papers every day. How troubling it is to me now to see what's in the papers with these young brothers who are being killed. Young brothers, a woman who was just a bystander. I mean, the Chicago police are out of control. They're murdering black people in Chicago and getting away with it. And the one that everyone saw the tape of, the mayor even knew about that and had paid off the family to keep it out of the news. And so this is something that the Chicago police now are not only killing, it's not leaders that they're killing, they are killing young people to stop them in their tracks. They have license to kill young people, and they have not been held accountable for it. And it has to stop. And so I am encouraged by Black Lives Matter. I'm encouraged to see young people out there demonstrating against it. And my hope is that in your generation, you all will lead the way to a society where things like that can never happen.
That was a heck of a story. And not just a story, but something that actually happened. Yes, Mr. Coates, we're now Paul and Ava, right? He challenged me out in the hallway. He says, oh, so you're moderating, right? So you're supposed to have jokes. You got a story or something? Well, actually, I don't have a joke, but I do have a personal anecdote to share. And it was interesting to hear about my home during the time that I was a very young girl growing up in the city of Chicago. The police were known to whoop some heads. That's what they did, and it was acknowledged. My grandparents were among that generation who were a part of that great migration to the north. And earlier, some of the panelists were talking about the fact that we sort of whitewash history. Everyone was there and everyone was behind what was going on and all of this. But I wanted to share just a little bit of what I heard around the dinner table when I was growing up as a little kid in Chicago, and hearing my grandparents who had grown up during Jim Crow and so forth, and had seen a lot and had experienced more than most of us could ever even imagine. And so when the Panthers, which really I think suffered from a public relations issue in many respects, because I was talking to my friend and colleague, Dr. Mabel Morrison, earlier, and she's from New Orleans, and we sort of had a moment because she echoed the same thing that I was thinking. When my grandparents talked about militants and the Black Panthers and so forth, they talked about, not just the Panthers, but even Martin Luther King. They talked about them with a bit of fear, because what they thought was, oh my God, these people are stirring up these crazy white folks, and it's getting ready to be on. As my students would say, it's getting ready to be on and popping. And popping not in a good way, turning up. I'm talking about killing folks, doing some of the dirty tricks and so forth and so on. And so this was what I internalized. And so Dr. Morrison and I were saying, wow, we didn't even know that the Panthers did all of these wonderful things. I didn't know anything about the breakfast programs and all of the things that were happening in the cities and all of that. So it really is enlightening to hear the positive aspects of what this movement was about. And I, for one, am really grateful for this opportunity to have this interaction with you. So now, on with Paul Coates. All right.
We'll give you a pass. Look, first of all, I'm so glad to be here. And for a number of reasons, and I'll share as I go along. And Lynn and I have a fortunate a fortunate position today, because we're here really because, you know, like we want to be here. We don't have to write any papers. We don't have to sign no logs or anything like that. We're here largely to share an experience, And for me, it's like one of those things, like I don't do a lot, you know, I just don't do a lot. And I think it's like for, you find Panthers like sometimes they go like two ways, you know, like some of them, like you find them today and they wear buttons down the side like it's still 1969. They wear berets like it's 1969. And then you'll have other people who just don't talk about it at all. You know, you have people that just don't talk about it at all. I'm probably in between that. So, like today is good because I get a chance to talk about it, and I get a chance to unpack some things and think about it, clear up some things in my own head, some things that I think happen, some things that I don't know happen. Listening to Lynn, I get to relive and be re-inspired by some of the things that touched me in my youth. So before I start, I want to go back to this morning. You know, we were talking about the movie last night, but I want to go back to this morning because your president opened this program, and I thought he touched on a real significant link between Panthers and between social movements and between what was happening in the 60s and what's happening today. I thought he touched on a very, very important link. And he gave it to folks who were in attendance this morning. He gave it to them as a responsibility to give back. A responsibility to give back. And I don't know how many people were in the audience this morning when the program opened? Okay. That may have gone over a lot of folks' head, you know, because it was just words and the president talking and I got something else to do. But I think he really, really captured what was present for so many people in the Black Panther Party, even if they didn't understand at the time, like myself, not understanding at the time what I was doing. His point was the importance and how central giving back to people is for you and how much of a benefit it is for you. And it's one of the lessons actually that comes out of the experience in the Panther Party. It's one of the things that I could see and I go back to now and I think of each and every person that was there to give and give fully. They were actually giving back. They were giving back in the sense that they were giving to that contemporary generation, but they were also giving back in the sense that they were prepared to give their lives to the person, as in the case of Fred and as in the case of so many other Panthers who died. They were prepared to give their lives to change something. They were prepared to give their lives, their time, their energy, their families. They were prepared to give up everything to change something. So it was a commitment to something bigger than themselves. And it was a gesture of giving that gave them something back in terms of freedom. And why that's so important, or why I think it's so important, is because I think it's a value, it's a value that was learned by many people in the Panther Party, and it's a value that's still retained by so many people who were in the Panther Party. It's a value that, again, as your president emphasized this morning, that is a good value for growth and development, and it's a value that also allows you to be in touch and in communication with the passion of your life. Giving identifies those things that you are passionate about. giving, committing yourself and being prepared to commit your life. There's gotta be some passion up in that one. There's not the room for selfishness when you put your life on the line. There's not the room for selfishness when you decide that you're going to give into the community. And it's in that space that self-growth occurs. So I'm saying that because I'm gonna come back to it again. I came to the Panther Party a little bit different than Lynn. I came to the Panther Party out of the military, having spent time in Vietnam, having come back, and all the time in Vietnam, all of the turmoil in this country was going on. Before I even went to Vietnam, the turmoil of the 60s, Martin Luther King leading demonstrations, dogs biting people, water hoses. My generation grew up connected with those demonstrations and connected in person and connected with those demonstrations through television. You know, that was the generation. Like, you guys got the internet now. We had television, okay? So stuff, we didn't have an interactive like relationship with it. I couldn't communicate back through the television what I was feeling, but it was being recorded in my brain. So after going to Vietnam and coming back, that recording was constantly playing. That witnessing of Black people was constantly playing and driving me to learn more about my people. And it was in that learning about my people that I learned about the Black Panther Party in a similar way that Lynn was exposed to these brothers, Bobby, and the other brothers, and Huey in California. California was like the mecca of resistance for us, you know? And when I say for us, I'm saying I don't want to be dismissive of what was happening in the South, the battles that Martin Luther King and so many other courageous people were carrying on in the South. But you have to understand, many of us, like Bobby had a great admiration for Martin Luther King. I didn't have that, you know, because I knew that I was not going to be in a place where I was going to let dogs bite me. I just didn't have that nonviolent piece in me. So I didn't have a lot of respect, and I felt we should fight and fight back in some way, but how to do it was never there. It was never present until one day I crossed the Black Panther Party. And I crossed them in the newspapers. And here are these brothers and sisters who are standing and resisting. That was so compelling to me. And here's the deal. I was in Baltimore at the time. I didn't know that there was a chapter of the Black Panther Party in Baltimore. But reading it, I began seeking it out, and I found that chapter in Baltimore. I didn't join at that time, but I did begin to make friends with some of the Panthers at that point. And I was excited by what they were doing. I was excited that they were not like in the street. They were not in the streets with guns in the sense of just fighting in a meaningless way. Their mantra was that the guns were for self-defense, and that we would be able to walk, we would be able to talk, we would be able to declare our space as we wanted to, and that the guns would back us up if we needed to use the guns. I thought that was really, really fascinating. I was exposed to the breakfast programs of the Panther Party, and I thought that was interesting too, getting up like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, going down and feeding kids. And the whole idea of solving a problem by action, by taking it on and feeding these kids before they went to school, pointing out this contradiction, which I insist was the largest, or one of the largest contributions to the Panther Party. The contradiction of kids going to school hungry was pointed out and addressed actively by the breakfast programs. The contradiction of Black men going to jail and being taken to places far away and just dropped down, Black women going to jail. was addressed by things like what Lynn said, prison programs, in which people actually, black people actually got buses and took busloads of people up to jail. At that time in Baltimore, you were out of luck because they didn't have shuttle services like they do now. They have shuttle services that carry people by the busload up there. But the Panthers took those things on, and I was so excited about them. I was so excited that I said, man, like, I had a birthday party coming. I said, man, like, this is really cool. I'm so excited about it. I know all of my friends will be excited about it. So I did this thing, and I invited so many people over to my house for this birthday party. And all I wanted was the Panthers to talk about what they were doing. The music was on, the food was there, the food was good, and what have you. The Panthers did not. 4th of July. She had to put that out there, okay? Friends do not out friends on things like that, okay? So look. So anyway, the long and the short of it is the Panthers didn't show up. They didn't show up, and it really upset me, man. All my friends, they were looking at me like, you know, what's up, man? You know, like, we here to hear the Panthers. So the interesting thing about that is it didn't, that fazed me, but I went back down to the Panther party to, you know, just to check and stuff. And the interesting thing, I would find out, I guess about 2 years or so later, why they didn't show up. That chapter was organized by the police. The Baltimore chapter was organized by the police. And I think we talked a little bit about this. Charles may have touched on some of this today, and when they were talking about how the Panthers, Uhuru was talking about how the police didn't want to necessarily kill people. They wanted to really, really disrupt. Well, they would organize chapters. And in that particular chapter that was organized by the police, they didn't show up because they were there killing somebody, which is real, real interesting. I didn't know any of this. And even when I went to, I went and I joined the Panthers later, I didn't find out about this until about 2 years later. Now, when I say that they were killing someone, let me be real, real specific on this. There were 6 agents inside that chapter that led a torture session and a killing. This was not the agent that set up the chapter. Okay, this was not the agent that set up the chapter. This was 6 different agents that at different points in torturing this guy, they would go out and report to, there was one from the Baltimore City Police that they would report to, a Major Du Bois. There was one from the state police that they would report to. There was one from the Army. There were 6 different informers. And I guess I'm sharing this with you because this would never have been known. This would never have been known. They ended up charging about, I think it was about 30 Panthers with this killing. It would never have been known that the police set this up. It would never have been known that their agents reported out and were instructed to go back in and how to torture the guy. It would never be known that the agents were instructed to take the guy out, have him killed, and dump him in the park. In the middle of this, while they were doing this, they were stopped by the police. The guy was in the car, and all of this was recorded. But who was behind the scenes? The agents who were actually doing this would never, never, never have been known were it not for the actions of one black man. So fast forward, I end up joining the party. I end up working as a community worker initially, and then I ended up being a defense captain of the party. While I'm defense captain, a trial comes up for some people who had been arrested during this killing. They don't know the difference. They know that something went down, but they don't even know the forces that were behind the scenes actually manipulating this. And no one can imagine that the counterintelligence program, and that was I think Charles responded, somebody said something about the FBI is much, much larger than that. The counterintelligence program is actually manipulating this and actually led to the killing of this guy. It comes down to Baltimore at that time. We not only had that case, we had a lot of other cases, and it comes down to us actually almost begging this one brother to take the case. We had a lot of white lawyers. The white lawyers would come forward in a minute. The brothers, first of all, there weren't that many black lawyers at that time. We're talking about the early 70s. We're talking about probably like 70, 71. There weren't that many black lawyers. And this one black lawyer, and I point him out because he's like one of the greatest heroes out of this period. This one black lawyer takes the case. You know why he took the case? He took the case to give back. He took the case to give back. He was at that time, and he's still alive, a very, very brilliant man. Most of the Panther cases that you ever see, like the 21 that was in the documentary last night, the 21, almost every Panther case that you will ever see, there's a team of lawyers. There's a team of lawyers. There seldom was one lawyer. There would be a team of lawyers. At minimum, the lawyer would have an assistant working with him to take notes. This bad brother, Larry Gibson, in Baltimore, who took the case to give back, and he was like, it wasn't a first thought of giving back. It was like a second thought of giving back. I'll do it. One of them things. I'll do it. He would come into court by himself, every day. And he was defending one person on this case. And I have to tell you that he had the second trial. The first person who went to trial went to jail. And he went to jail for life. He had a white lawyer. I can see it today. I see it today. And I remember hearing a part of a discussion that she had. He went to jail for life. And part of the discussion that she had that I already heard was that he's lucky they didn't kill him. You know? It was a death case. He's lucky they didn't kill him. And that was his lawyer. Larry Gibson came and took the second trial. And he literally, it took him, I don't know how many days, but it took him a week to begin seeing the contradictions, listening to the state's case and what have you. And then he went to work dismantling that case. He went to work tearing it apart, piece by piece by piece. And in this one man, he would come in, he wouldn't even spend time even talking to the Panthers because he was on his way to another trial. He had cases up the yang that he did. He's one of the most successful lawyers in Baltimore. He's retired now, but he teaches. But he was one of the most successful lawyers. He was one of your teachers? Yeah. One of the most successful lawyers, and he's one of the baddest, as far as I'm concerned, he's one of the baddest men on the planet. Because single-handedly, he went in and exposed the case and showed how the government had manipulated this case and had manipulated informers to do all of these actions by himself. The interesting thing about it is, in his spirit of giving back, he didn't even know what he had done. He didn't know that, he knew that he tore the case apart. He knew that he had a victory because, you know, I mean, that was evident. They dropped all of the charges against everybody, except the guy who had been convicted, okay? But they dropped all of the other charges. It was about 30 charges. They were chasing Panthers that were all hidden all over the country. They were still chasing. They had to drop all of the charges, and they dropped them to limit the degree of exposure that the federal agents had in this case. So he knew he had done that, but he did not understand, and I don't know if he really understands to today how significant it was for him as an individual to take on that case. Here, I share that with you because, again, I was really touched by hearing your president this morning and by hearing the notion of giving back. And I thought a number of things to share with you. But that story of Larry Gibson giving back, dismantling the myths that surrounded the Black Panther Party, because you see, if he hadn't done that, if another lawyer like Elspeth Boothby that had represented the first person had taken that case on, if he hadn't given back, then we never would know what happened. We would just say that the Panthers, even the Panthers that were involved, did not know who these agents were. The agent that set up the chapter there, I told y'all that, he worked for the National Security Agency. His name was Warren Hart. He's the one who set up the chapter. He got out of the chapter a little before, right around the time that this went down. Guess where he went? He went up to Canada and became an agent for the Royal Mounted Police in Canada, doing exactly the same types of things that he was doing here. We had a lot of, let me point this out too. Do y'all think he was doing it because he was giving back to somebody? No, he wasn't giving back. I just want to make that. We had a lot of informers. We had a lot of problems with trust throughout the country with Panthers and Panther movements. So that Baltimore story is one of them. I have a few other things to share, and I just want to share it in terms of impressions with you. And these are thoughts, and I do think about this often. I think about the people, like one of them, one of the thoughts and impressions that I have is, and I can't shake it in my brain, is that the Panthers that I served with were some of the smartest people I've ever encountered in my life. And especially the women. You know, we used to have this thing like, man, the women in the Panther Party, like, y'all saw Huey P. Newton? You know, like the women used to swoon over Huey P. Newton. But there were some beautiful sisters in that documentary also, right? The sisters were some of the most beautiful sisters in the world, and they were some of the smartest sisters, some of the smartest people, some of the smartest men that I've ever encountered in my life, I found inside of the Black Panther Party. I'm still struck by the lessons in leadership that people who had been in the party before me and people who came after me gave me. One of the things of leadership that I took away from the party was the whole notion of completing, I got some of this in the military too, but I got it more in the Panther Party, the whole notion of completing the job, you know, completing the task, completing the mission. Once you start on it, you don't stop. You don't stop, and it don't matter what the odds are. Like Charles talked about the Constitutional Convention, and he and I talked about this last night, and he was saying this was one of the activities of the Panther Party. The Panther Party had set out, they had set out this movement, and they wanted to change some of the articles of the Constitution, and they organized people all around the country, white and black, on it. Well, that action has been described to some people as a debacle, and it was, oh gosh, it was crazy. However, Carrying it out were people who were given to other people, And one of the lessons I got out, I never will forget, sitting in this long meeting that we were having, and we were talking about thousands of people descending on Washington, D.C., and how we were going to feed those people. How are we possibly going to feed thousands of people? Because the Panthers didn't have no money, y'all. They didn't have no money. And inside of that meeting came a plan for not only getting chickens, not only getting food, but inside of that meeting came a plan for getting refrigerated trucks to truck that food across the country. I'm sitting and looking at these young black folks just constructing with no money, just taking on the task and doing it. Smart people. Comradeship occurs to me. Dr. Jones also talked something about comrade. You know, well, I'm going to say everybody, but most folks may know what it is to have a brother. You know what it is to have a sister. You know what it is to have a mother and a father. In the Panthers, when you stepped inside of that space that I'm describing, of giving back, you stepped inside that space with other people who had done the same thing. And those people became your comrade. It was like a beautiful thing to be able to be in a chapter in Baltimore, travel any place in the country like Chicago, which I did, and be greeted, like people didn't know you from Adam. They may have known your name, but to be greeted and received as a comrade, to be given a bed that another comrade had the night before, but they were giving it to you. Comradeship. To be given clothes, to be taken care of, to be embraced, to be loved by your comrades. I started to go off on that because I was going to talk about sex. And I only said sex to just alert y'all at the end of this. Not because I got anything to tell y'all about sex. I just wanted to use that word and get it in because I'm at the end, okay? Sure. So we're going to close on that because it's time for us to take some questions, okay? But I wanted to get that in anyway, some kind of way. So anyway, it came, all right? Look, thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening to me.
Make their way to the microphones, and we will take questions and answers until 4:30.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Justine Marshall. I'm a mass comm major.
Hey, Justine.
Thank you for coming. I had a question about the Black Lives Matter movement. How do you think they could effectively combat police brutality? And how does that tie into the Black Panther movement as well?
You know, I have some questions about Black Lives Matter too. Like, I don't know how they're going to effectively combat it, you know? But I suspect they will. And my questions are, my questions about them have to be as an elder, like sitting back, like watching. But I don't know how they're going to effectively do it. I don't know that anyone effectively combats it. You know, like you have to combat what underlies that. Because, you know, the police brutality is like one level, but there's a whole political system, there's a whole mentality that holds that level in place. And so what you're seeing when you see police brutality is like the visible. And so it's what's behind it that actually has to be affected. And how that's done, I'm not really sure, but I am up for watching and up for participating to the extent and up for supporting in whatever way that I could help them do it. The answer, you know, the answer may lie right there at that microphone. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I'd like to comment on that too. I think that Black Lives Matter has some maturing to do, but it's encouraging that people are speaking out. You have to remember that the police are just the enforcers for the powers that be. And so what you have to do is leave apathy behind and step into a full sense of citizenship. Just as my young friend, I don't know if she's still in here, asked earlier, how can we respect the laws when they weren't written for us? The laws are good laws. It's who's enforcing them that makes it bad. And the responsibility is to step up and say, we're citizens and we're not taking this anymore. But if we knew the absolute answer, we would win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Hello, my name is Amira Mitchell, and I'm a senior here at Delaware State, political science major. And I just want to first and foremost say thank you guys for coming out. This was awesome. And when you both were speaking, you guys talked about police brutality and how we kind of see that today. And sir, you said you guys had televisions, and today we have the internet. And we see, Eric Gardner, we see Laquan McDonald in Chicago, and the ladies asked you guys about the Black Lives Matter movement. But to add on to that question, do you guys think we will have a leader like Malcolm X or Bobby Seale, or, you guys organized? I think that was a focal point. So do you guys think that we would have somebody, like a leader, to take us to the next level?
It's interesting because you have those leaders now, You have those leaders now. And again, like I spoke earlier at the microphone, like you're standing there. Like Malcolm X was no different than you. Bobby Seale was no different than you. No different than the leadership or people who are actually, what was different and what is different was that there was a declaration made that they were going to resist, that they were going to talk about this, that they were going to put themselves in between this and what was oppressing people. And that's open to all of us to step into. So it's not a matter of looking for the leadership, it's a matter of taking on the mantle and doing what's there to do. I think, But Lynn has a take also.
Well, I don't believe in the single great leader theory. I think that when you have a single great leader, they're murdered in their sleep. I think that it's a responsibility that we all share to change things, and to say that we share equally in our citizenship, in our humanity, and that we will declare a baseline for what kind of treatment people should get. That police, it's just inappropriate to have a police force of goons who are going out doing these things to people. It's not as simple as, where is our Bobby Seale that'll end it all? Because if you just keep waiting for the next Bobby Seale, it'll never happen.
Right.
I just want to quickly follow too, because it was in the question that I was asking earlier today about leadership. One of the things that is very admirable about Black Lives Matter is their leadership is very decentralized. Right. I mean, extremely decentralized. So who do you kill when leadership is decentralized? Who do you go after? And that's not to say that those agencies don't know who the more prominent and moving people are, but they have a posture. They have a posture that goes against the whole notion of one leader being the leader. Mm-hmm. I think that's very, very interesting and very attractive.
Thank you. Thank you both.
How are you doing this evening? Richard Odell Dickens Jr. I'm a junior at Delaware State College. And my question is, I believe those who don't understand Black Lives Matter, when the whole All Lives Matter thing came about, it was seen as a joke mocking the movement. How long do you think it will take before Black lives look at it as, we're fighting the war, I'm fighting the war, I can't win, and I want to lay it all down?
that a rhetorical question?
No.
Yes, I think it's on you. You know, like you got to tell me. You understand what I'm saying? Your
sir.
actions will tell me. It's not like a question like somebody sitting here can answer. You are what's happening right now. And so like your actions will be the answer to that question. It's not like an elder to tell you that. I hope that's not a mystery.
No.
Do you feel me?
I was seeing it more as, if we're seeing the things that are going on and they're continuously going on, and it's seeming like as one being of a different look or a different color or skin tone, and you not mattering anymore, how can you keep viewing it as still happening and not wanting to go against it and start a revolution that could just change the way people would see it? Because I feel, as being a Black Lives and seeing my brothers and sisters, as we're continuously confronted with opposition for us just wanting to live, I'm just not comfortable with it continuously happening. And that's why my question was, when will you see that day where you might see somebody just go off the edge and do something that you wouldn't see coming? That was my question to it.
I don't think either of us is comfortable with those things happening, but it's not something that you can just pop off and do that'll end it either. You've got to effectively organize a movement to end it. That's why I asked you, was that a rhetorical question?
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Okay, so we have time for one more question, please.
My name is Jason King. I'm a studio art major, and I'm a senior. I'm actually doing my capstone right now, and I was talking to my teacher last semester and going towards this semester, and with our capstone, we have to do something that illustrates what we learned 4 years we've been here. Well, he was talking about I should do like the Black Lives Matter type thing, but then I started talking to people and they're like, it's overdone. So what I did was I made it more personal. Like, would you give me some inspiration a little bit? Because I was sitting there and I write poetry too. So like hearing you talk, because I'm around a lot of older people. So I've heard this, like until I got around, like in my teens, I haven't really been around people my age. So all this stuff that you're saying is just like, this is the second time I'm hearing it. So any inspiration you have towards my project?
Me?
Either one.
Okay, look, straight up, right?
Yeah.
If you've been around this all of your life, it's time to just stop, listen to it. And there is the inspiration. It's there. It's already there. It's already there. Respond to what is there. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay, it's there already. You really, really have a good grounding. Just listen to yourself. It's not like it ain't gonna come from up here. Like a matter of fact, if somebody start telling you what to do to get inspiration, watch out.
I mean, what I was saying was, because like I said, when I was sitting there, I got a little bit more added on to what I had. I was just seeing if y'all had anything else.
Got it.
Because I knew y'all were like with the time restraint and everything, so yeah.
Yeah, I'll gladly talk to you, but it's here, brother. You already have it. You already have it. You just have to hear yourself and then take action.
Okay.
It's there.
Thank you all very much for coming. Our dean, Dr. Marshall Stevenson, wanted to offer closing remarks.
Yes, before you leave, the first thing I want you to do is to thank our guests. Coming here and taking the time out of their busy schedules to reflect back in history. And I'm sure this event has stirred some things up, but also in seeing you young people, it has inspired them as we hope it has inspired you. In addition, Brother Seal is still here. We know he inspired you this morning, telling you about how the movement got started even before the formation of the Black Panther Party. And so that was very important for you to hear, as well as the films last night, which put all of this in a context. I need to thank someone in particular, Ms. Teresa Smith in my office worked tirelessly to help to get those. When I say tirelessly, I mean tirelessly. I want to thank Mr. Coates, Ms. French, Dr. Jones. Dr. Williams had to go back, but I appreciated and think you appreciated the comments and the insight they gave us on a serious period in time just 50 years ago. That may seem like a long time to you young people, but it really, really was not that long ago. And in particular, see how it connects today with the Black Lives Matter movement. Today, what you're seeing are these random legal killings. But as you go back, you also see literally a war zone to stop this organization that was protesting, among other things, police brutality. And it was a very calculated movement to stamp out an organization that was not about violence. It was about self-defense, but it was about giving back to the community and telling the larger community, look, we are human beings. According to the Constitution, we deserve the same rights as anyone else. And today, that message is just as relevant as it was then. So thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.